At noon today, right here in the State House in Trenton, Governor Jim Florio called it a happy day for New Jersey. By declaring a Public Education Act unconstitutional, the state Supreme Court had just supported Florio's plan to redistribute funds from rich districts to poor ones. Welcome to the 11th hour. I'm Robert Lipsyte. Governor Florio is in the midst of what some might call a taxing revolution. He's called for budget cuts and hikes in income and sales taxes. The burden, he says, to be shifted heavily toward the rich. The benefit, he says, for the middle class and the poor. Earlier today, I talked to Governor Florio about his taxing revolution and about the impact of the state Supreme Court's new decision.
Well, to the degree that I've talked through the course of my campaign and since I've been in office about being the governor of one New Jersey, there is no better example of where we don't have one New Jersey than our current educational system. We have one New Jersey where kids graduate from school and go off to the best educational opportunities, best colleges and so on. And we have another New Jersey where children graduate unable to read, go off on a road to despair. So that this decision was very important because it spells out the fundamental principle that educational opportunity ought to be available to all of our students, and it shouldn't depend upon where you live to spell out what kind of an education you would get.
Yeah, that decision and what you've been talking about smacks of a kind of 40s New Deal social engineering, using taxes, using money to kind of restructure society. Is that what you're after?
Well, I don't know how you define fairness and opportunity and a set of values that I hope most of us subscribe to. I mean, what we're talking about, and I've made promises through the course of my campaign, and I've been fulfilling those promises, to provide for opportunity for everyone. The opportunity to have fair automobile insurance rates, which we don't have in New Jersey, which we're not changing. The opportunity to have a pleasant environment, you know, clean water, and clean air. All of those things, I don't know how you categorize them in terms of ideology, but what I'm suggesting is that the people, the vast majority of the people in our state want those things. I've been selected as their governor, and we're out spelling out how we're going to get them.
There are people who say that, you know, we've come to New Jersey, we've come to these wealthy communities in New Jersey because we want the specific advantages of the kind of education that we can get there. And now Florio comes along, and he's making a level playing field, and that's not what we want.
Well, I guess what we're saying is that everybody in the state ought to be entitled to have the educational opportunity that the best of us can have. I now am reinforced by the Supreme Court of the state of New Jersey that just came down and said unequivocally that our existing system of funding education is clearly unconstitutional. That system, by the way, relies upon local property taxes to fund our educational systems. Property taxes in New Jersey are outrageously high because we in our state rely upon them more than any other state in the union. And I guess what I've tried to do is to focus upon helping those people who have been paying the freight for our system, the middle class people.
Have we come through a period of politicians looking at the short term?
Well, I think we've come through a period when looking at the short term was glorified as being the end goal. We've come through a period, and I think we're coming to an end of it, when there were political people or leaders who were out pandering to the most base instincts in all of us. And I think the pendulum is swinging. People are coming to understand that this is for New Jersey, a relatively small state. We're 7.5 million people. You can't build islands of self-interest 5 miles away from an area that you don't want to have anything to do with. It doesn't make any sense, and over and above that, it won't work.
Do you have any sense that beyond what you're trying to do in the state, that this is a laboratory? I mean, there's no question that Democratic politicians, perhaps all politicians in the country, are watching to see what happens here.
Well, to the degree that it helps anybody outside of the state, that's fine. I'm focusing upon what I think we should be doing in New Jersey to make sure that we have the toughest assault weapon ban, the strongest environmental water enforcement law. All of those things are things that I initiated to get done because we have the problems here. To the degree that other people have problems that are similar, they may very well look at our experience in New Jersey and sort of belly up to the bar to do some of the hard things that we've had to do. But I think the major thing that I'm really convinced has to be looked at is this whole concept of a crisis of leadership. That a lot of people are saying that people are alienated from their leaders and from government. That may be true, but I think in some respects it's also that leaders are alienated from people. They're afraid to go out and try to make the case that what it is that they think should be done, thinking somehow that people don't understand about hard choices. People don't understand that when there's a problem, there are alternatives to resolve the problem. Explain them, that's what leadership is about. Then advocate what you think is the best approach, and then bring people to try to make judgments. There are some leaders, particularly in Washington in the last couple of years, who never wanted to go through the discipline of that decision-making process, thinking that somehow people couldn't understand that. People understand that from their own lives. Life is about choices. Life is about facing up to short-term versus long-term. So what we've been doing here in New Jersey is to try to...
Interrupt you for a moment. Is there any possibility they just didn't care?
Well, I'm not going to go into motivations. I'm going to assume good faith that people care, certainly about problems. I just don't think they had the confidence either in their own ability to go explain things, or maybe they just don't think that people can make rational decisions about their own well-being, and that's sad.
Well, Harry Truman says something about leadership being giving the people something that they don't want and making them like it, or making the case, as you will. Is that the kind of role model you're talking about?
Well, I guess I'm thinking about talking in terms of long-term interest versus short-term interest. If someone says to me, well, we can't afford to go clean up the Jersey Shore, my response is, can we afford not to clean up the Jersey Shore? If someone tells me that we can't afford to put money into elevating our educational system so that all of our children have a good quality education, my response is, my God, what is the cost going to be to all of us if we don't improve our educational system? That type of analysis, that type of a presentation, I think most people can understand, and then they'll make the right decisions.
Yeah. Now, commentators looking at you from a remove, Richard Reeves most recently said that you're either the boldest or the craziest politician in America. You smile.
Well, I don't know if I know some people, so I'm sure I'm not the craziest.
Are you the boldest?
Well, I'm just doing what I think has to be done. I was elected to be a leader. A leader is out there analyzing the problems, the challenges, formulating responses to those challenges, trying to, in a democratic process, develop a consensus around whatever is the preferred option, and then executing and making the system work.
I have to say that you were also elected because you said you weren't going to raise taxes, and then you did. So that maybe the perception of exactly who you were and where you were coming from was different before and after the election. Let me go back to the idea, though, that when somebody does say something like you are either the boldest or the craziest, what's your reaction? Do you feel that you are being misinterpreted or not fully understood what's happening here?
No, I think anyone's entitled to categorize what I'm doing however they choose to do so, in a friendly way or a less than friendly way. That's part of being in government, that's part of being in politics. But I guess the way I choose to interpret what I'm doing is not running away from problems. I'm willing, and in some respects I'm anxious to make decisions, because the deferral of decisions when you have serious problems doesn't make the problems go away. They compound, they become worse. Unfortunately, in our nation, and in some respects in our state, we have gone through a period of time when decisions were not made, and we papered over. And accordingly, we have problems that are now monumental. We've got a $3 billion deficit in the state of New Jersey, off of a $12 billion budget. I've had to submit a budget to the people and to the legislature that is admittedly a tough budget. I'm cutting $2 billion out of this budget. You can go and sort of try to fool people by coming up with all kinds of gimmicks, but it catches up. The better approach is to level, to go say, these are the things we have to do. Here's my best calculation as to what we should be doing. Now let's come reason together to see how we can come out with a balanced budget, which is what the law is in New Jersey.
Were you misinformed coming into office about the deficit and the financial problems of the state?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting thing that no one has ever talked about a $3 billion deficit in the state of New Jersey, ever. So I've cut $2 billion out of the budget. If in the course of the campaign anyone had said, or I had said, I'm going to cut $2 billion out of the budget, first of all, I doubt if anybody would have believed it. But then over and above that, that would have resolved, for most people, any thought about needing new revenue. Unfortunately, the magnitude of our problem is that we have to cut $2 billion and then still need revenue to be able to ensure that we have the balanced budget. Most importantly, to preserve our bond rating, which is a very important consideration, that we have already been getting relatively good marks from the bond rating people. That's very important for the economic health of the state, and we're doing it.
Somebody made the parallel between Jim Florio and Gorbachev, that your perestroika looks better outside New Jersey than it does to people in New Jersey who feel it's going to cost them money.
Well, it's interesting, because as I go up and down the state, my wife Lucinda and I, we go to a lot of diners, we go to places, there is a hunger for leadership in this state. And that people will come and say, well, I'm not sure I like everything that you're advocating, but at least you're facing up to the problems. We knew that things were not being dealt with in the way that they should be. We can tell every time we're stuck in traffic that there's something wrong with our infrastructure. We knew that part of the problem at the Jersey Shore was that sewage treatment plants weren't being updated, and literally sewage was being put into the ocean. We knew that our automobile insurance program in New Jersey had to be crazy, and you came and explained to us how it was out of sync with every other state system, and therefore we appreciate the fact that you're explaining to us these things, willing to make decisions, and leadership is part of what being the governor is about.
And yet, when you talk about leadership, I mean, people felt comfortable with Ronald Reagan's leadership because it gave them at least a sense of security for a while. What do you think people want from you? I mean, what do you sense in these diners? What do they want? Well, they want the fighter, they want the advocate, the explainer?
Well, I think primarily what they want is problems resolved. People want to know that if their kids walk the street, they're not going to be accosted by drug dealers. People want to know that there is hope for being able to, when you get sick, not have to go into bankruptcy to deal with the hospital bill. People in this country and in this state are very pragmatic. They want someone to be able to give some guidance and give some support to addressing the problems that disrupt our lives. So to the degree that a leader runs from that task, by definition, the person is not a leader. To the degree that someone steps up and says there are 2 alternatives or 3 alternatives, none of them are totally pleasant, but you either like the problem or you like one of the alternatives. And that means we have to reason together, get the legislators to work together with us, and offer the resolution.
I hear you saying that you're walking into a leadership vacuum.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that there is no question about the fact that the problems have been allowed to build for a while. You don't have a $3 billion deficit that just emerges somehow. For the last couple of years, the state has spent more than revenues came in. We had expenditures far in excess of the amount of revenues that came in. You can do that for a while, but ultimately it drives you into bankruptcy. The state of New Jersey is clearly insolvent. It is something that has to be addressed. Yeah.
There have been polls that people are willing to spend more money, to be taxed more heavily for the services that they need. Do you have the sense that, from talking to people in these diners and all, that people are willing to sacrifice for a longer-term goal?
I think if they are convinced that the money is being used for worthy purposes and that it's not being wasted. And frankly, to this point, I can't give anybody the assurance that money has not been wasted in the past. I mean, one of the things that we immediately focused upon was something as mundane as state cars. In the last 8 years, the state has gone from 3,500 state cars to over 8,000 state cars. Many of them should not have been out on the road. We've already called in 1,000. We want to make sure that we have a government that is as lean and as efficient as possible. I mean, all the government that we need and not any more than that. This budget that I've submitted is less in absolute dollars than the budget of last year. Not a lot of places in government where people are reducing the budget. But I happen to work very hard for my own money, and I don't waste it. So as governor, I'm not going to allow the people's money to be wasted here in the state.
Yeah, if we jumped ahead and kind of looked back at what you hope to accomplish and what perhaps you will have accomplished in 4 years or 8 years, what would be a signpost, a benchmark that would tell you that you've succeeded?
Yeah. Well, I guess the key word that I'm extremely comfortable with is opportunity, and that I would hope that in the Jersey that is here
That's very abstract.
after Jim Florio, but you can take it and reduce it to things that are very specific. Education. I want every child to be able to go and have an opportunity to advance themselves as far as they possibly can go. I'm a high school dropout. I mean, I got a second chance. I left high school and joined the Navy. I thought I knew all the answers. Later on, found out that there were some doors of opportunity that were not opened. So I was lucky. I got a second chance. I was able to go on. I want to make sure that this state, with the high dropout rate that we have, starts to provide to the other young people in this state the same opportunities that I had to get us either a second chance or, more importantly, not to go through that same trauma that I went to. But opportunity is not something that is abstract. It is real. We've always thought of ourselves as a state where there was upward mobility for people to get to be middle class. In some sections of our state, in some areas, that opportunity is not there today. I want to restore that.
And how would you know that you've done it? I mean, what would be the statistics? What would be the hard, concrete facts?
Well, I think to the degree that we can go and say that the dropout rate in our school system is not what it was now, I think that's a good economic indicator. To the degree that we can say, as we can't say now, that those who are going out into the job market, out of our school system, are fully qualified and have meaningful jobs available to them. I spoke with one prominent business CEO in the state. Said they just had to go through 100 applicants, high school graduates, to find 10 people who were eligible for the 10 job openings that were available in this company. That's an indication that stagnation is ahead unless we change these things. We're on the verge of changing them. We have spelled out some programs as to how to go about changing them, and I want to do that because it is in everybody's interest to do that.
Did you have any political heroes?
Well, Robert Kennedy, in a contemporary way, my contemporary way, was someone that I was very enthusiastic about. And as a historical person, I was a Theodore Roosevelt fan, and then Franklin Delano Roosevelt were individuals that I always read about and admired for different facets of their personality and their style.
What did you like about Franklin Delano Roosevelt?
Franklin Delano Roosevelt was someone who was knowledge-based. If you've ever read the Schlesinger books on Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt always wanted to be at the center of all of the information gathering mechanisms. On the basis of that, he would formulate policy, always knowing more than almost anyone else did because he maximized the opportunities for input. Sometimes political people tend to wall themselves off, minimizing information coming in. One of the comments, of course, about President Reagan was that he had minimal information input. That is not my concept of how it is you function as a governmental leader.
Now, of course, Teddy Roosevelt charged up San Juan.
Yes.
Is that what you liked about him?
I liked Teddy Roosevelt not only in terms of the substance of the things that he was interested in, conservation. He was one of the early environmentalists. But I also liked the willingness to, as I said earlier, sort of belly up to the bar and take on, in his case, the trusts. He was a very politically courageous person, and I admire that.
Mm-hmm. Of course, some of the dominating Democrats as you were growing up were Henry Wallace and Walter Mondale. It was a very different kind of a look, wasn't it?
Well, I guess what I'm suggesting is the characteristics that I regard as the essence of political leadership are the ones that Robert Kennedy demonstrated, the inspirational quality of being able to touch people and to apply and appeal to their best instincts as opposed to their worst instincts, to be able to inspire and to move forward and to move people to a higher plane of living and aspiring for better qualities of life for everyone.
Yeah. Now, if I came back, 30 years from now to talk to whoever's sitting in this chair, hopefully I'd be able to do that, and ask, what was it about Jim Florio that so inspired you? What would it be? I mean, how would you like to be thought of?
Well, I guess the idea of always wanting to do better, never being satisfied with what it is that we're achieving today, because we can always do better. And I work very hard to try to understand things, to be able to bring people together. I guess I'm an optimist, because when I see a problem, I don't lament the problem. I immediately get about trying to overcome it, and in some respects regard it as a challenge to be overcome. So I would hope that people would say at some point that Governor Florio always worked to overcome difficulties and left the state in a better position than when he came onto the scene.
And then the L word, the idea that so many of your programs do seem what people had traditionally called orthodox, liberal programs. Is that a problem, to be called a liberal?
Well, the L word that I'm interested in is leader. And leader entails you're telling me what the problem is, my then formulating a response to legitimately deal with the problem, and then putting the burden on you to go categorize what it is you want to call my response. I happen to be frugal. My wife calls me cheap. I happen to think that we should be always trying to have the most cost-effective approach to problems. And whether that labels me as something versus something else, I am what I am, and I think those are the values that most people have. Most people, and particularly folks in the middle, I mean, they're left out. And some of the newspapers have been interestingly speculating about me as Robin Hood, making the cute line about taking from the rich and giving to the poor. That just demonstrates that they are unaware of the people in the middle. Those are the people who have really just been left out. And my values are their values. I'm a blue-collar person. My father was a shipyard worker. My grandfather was an immigrant. I've worked my way through school, and I think my values do reflect the values of the vast majority of people in our state. And what I'm doing is the same thing that most of the people in the state would do if they were in this chair. They would say that our automobile insurance system is unfair, correct it. They would say that a polluter should pay to clean up, not a taxpayer. They should say that if someone poisons our water, they ought to go to jail. They would say that we don't want, drug dealers able to outgun the policeman. So all of the things that I've been representing, all the things I've been talking about, I regard as just a reflection of the wisdom of the people of this state, and I will continue in that way.
Do you think this would work in America as well as in New Jersey?
Well, I guess I'm not as much of an expert on the entire country, but I happen to think we have shared values. New Jersey is not that different than the rest of the nation. And I think for the most part, the shared values of a sense of community, caring about each other. I mean, not some extreme description of all of us as being soft and whatever. People are supposed to care about each other, and I think the vast majority of people do care about each other. So I think for the most part, the values that I've talked about are values that most people in this country can coalesce around, yes.
What is the word soft? Who would call this soft?
Well, you find some people who, however they categorize themselves, say, well, you start talking about a sense of community, caring about each other. I just gave the commencement address at Rutgers University, and I said this is a nation that has been founded upon tolerance. Why is it that intolerance seems to be on the rise? We've got to start putting ourselves in the positions of other people. When one group goes against another group, we can't be passive. We've got to be actively involved in protecting all of us, because what happens to one group today could just as soon happen to us tomorrow. so that we all are we're a family. And I regard that as the essence of the reason for being for this nation and for the state. Some perhaps would categorize that as soft thinking.
Governor Florio, thank you very much. That's the 11th hour. I'm Robert Lipsyte.
If you missed any of tonight's program or would like to see it again, catch the early morning rebroadcast of the 11th hour tomorrow at 6:30 a.m.